From WKGC Public Media, this is ReelTalk, the place where you can enjoy the cinematic conversations frame by frame each week. I'm your host, R.L. Terry. If movies are your thing, you're in the right place for today's review of Emerald Fennell's imaginative adaptation of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, now in cinemas nationwide. Is Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights a bold, thoughtful reinterpretation of a literary classic, or a grotesquely self-indulgent fever dream? You be the judge. And that may sound a little hyperbolic, but the question feels unavoidable. Fennell is undeniably a visionary director. Her eye for composition, texture, and tonal immersion is extraordinary. The production design, cinematography, and costuming are nothing short of exquisite. This film is a gothic romance rendered through contemporary sensibilities with remarkable visual confidence. That is, without question, one of the most visually striking adaptations of a Brontë novel ever, be it Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights, Sense and Sensibility, you name it. It looks gorgeous, but we're going to talk about where the film may have been a little bit weaker during the course of our hour today. As a matter of fact, of everything from a technical achievement and perspective of a director, the film does incredibly well. The screenplay is another matter entirely, where Brontë constructed a narrative architecture built on decay of estates, relationships, even moral order, which Fennell hints to at the very beginning of her movie. Fennell often rearranges or redistributes character traits in ways that undermine that structural collapse. And in fact, many characters are downright flattened. Motivations shift, symbolism loses its arc. When Fennell adheres to the novel, the film finds footing. When she diverges, it falters, which is quite a lot. And so this isn't a simple thumbs up or thumbs down conversation today. It's about interpretation. Interpretation of the novel, interpretation of previous film adaptations. We're going to talk a lot about the Wyler film from 1939 today. And really, our conversation today is applicable to not only this film, but a wide variety of film and television offerings now. And it's about whether contemporary sensibilities illuminate classic texts, or classic films, if you will, or impose upon them. And because this story, at its core, concerns gender, power, agency, repression, and emotional violence, I am especially pleased to welcome Melissa Watts, a longtime friend and former graduate school colleague of mine, whose perspective I'm eager to hear on this film, which, in my opinion, for the best coverage of the film, requires a female lens. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thank you. Happy to be here on the other side of the radio.
Yes, very happy to have you here. Melissa is, in addition, a long-time listener of the show since its very beginning. So thank you very much for your listenership, Melissa. And I'm so excited to sit down and talk with you about this film today. And you don't often go to the movie theater, so I'm even thankful and grateful that you took the time to go to the movie theater to watch this. Because listeners, the first thing she asked me was, is it available on streaming? And she already knows how I feel about streaming movies. And listeners, you know how I feel about the encroachment of streaming, but I digress. And so when I said, well, it's only in theaters, so she still went out. So I'm glad that she went out there. So, Melissa, something I like to ask of all my first-time guests is to let us know 2 or 3 of their favorite movies and why. So, what 2 or 3 titles do you have for us today?
Well, I'm hoping you don't tease me, but my number one favorite all-time movie is Jaws.
Oh, no, you won't get any, no teasing here. We've talked a lot about Jaws, including our big 50th anniversary special last year. And so, big fan of Jaws here. So, you are in good company.
Okay, well, I love Jaws. I love everything about it. I love the setting on Martha's Vineyard, aka Amity.
Mm-hmm.
I love how it slowly builds suspense in this small, peaceful beach town, and then
Mm-hmm.
along comes Bruce, who shatters that calm. I think the premise is simple, even if the filming of the film was not.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it was almost an unintentional masterpiece.
Yes,
And I
agreed.
think most people do, but I absolutely love the chemistry between Brody and Hooper and Quint. Who doesn't love
Mm-hmm.
the whole part of the movie on that boat on the Orca? I mean, it's so much fun, even though it's intense.
Mm-hmm.
And the simple score is iconic and eerie,
Oh
and
yeah.
it feels personal because I love the beach, and you know, the ocean, it always feels so threatening. You don't know what's down there, and
Yeah.
that fear from the film sort of lingers, you know, until of course you watch it again.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I'll give you my second favorite, and then once again I ask not to tease because I love the movie Twister. I absolutely love it.
Oh, Twister's such a fun movie. And while I think in some respects it may be able to be argued as a product of its time, it has managed to steer clear of that path. And it continues to be one that is entertaining, great cast, simple plot. We have some complex characters, really wonderful film.
Love it. And you know, it's not just tornadoes, it's like an obsession.
Yes, it is. Yes, it certainly is.
And for me, it's as much as it is like full of chaos and should be terrifying storms, I find it oddly comforting to watch.
I think it's because many of us enjoy a nice thunderstorm this morning. It was certainly stormy here. As listeners are listening to this, I'm referring to Sunday morning. We are pre-recording today because today is a holiday, so we're here on Sunday recording the episode. So Sunday morning was very stormy outside. In fact, there were several tornado watches, but I opened up the porch door and I just loved hearing the rain, and there's the little bit of a thunder out there. It's when the wind started blowing the rain and the mist into my place that I did have to close the door. But until that happened, I enjoyed it, and I too find it comforting sitting there with my coffee. And there's just something about the rhythmic pitter patter of the rain and a nice hot cup of coffee. Not coffee for you. I know you don't like coffee,
Diet Coke.
but so I totally get where you're coming from on Twister. And as much as I think we could talk about Jaws and Twister for an entire show, we do have another movie to talk about today. So you ready to get into it?
Yes, I am.
Okay, excellent. So we'll start here, Melissa. Fennell, clearly visionary director. I don't know if you saw was 2 years ago Saltburn or not. You also have
I did.
a promising young woman. Okay, so she, clearly visionary director. In all her films, including this one, excellent production design, wonderful costuming, gorgeous cinematography. All of that is stunning, wonderful shot composition. And in this movie, kind of like in Saltburn a bit too, we have this neo-Gothic atmosphere. It's highly immersive and meticulously composed. So my question to you is, and this is where we're going to begin, in your perspective, does the visual brilliance of Wuthering Heights, Fennell's Wuthering Heights, does it compensate at all for the narrative deviation, whether we're talking deviation from the novel, deviation from the previous Wyler film, and the Wyler film largely an extension of the novel, so there's very few differences between the two. So does it at all compensate for that deviation, or do you think that those two realms are inseparable in an adaptation? What do you think about that?
Well, in general, I think Fennell's movies do draw you in with all that beautiful visionary, you know, direction, but
Mm-hmm.
and they definitely give you feelings.
Yeah.
But and even if the story isn't exactly like the original, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
the film or the
Mm-hmm.
novel, beautiful visuals can't make up for a weak story. Not that I'm calling
Mm-hmm.
this a weak story, but I don't think that would make up for a weak story in general.
Mm-hmm.
So like the best movies would have both. They would have that great story, a strong story, and also the great cinematography. So stunning scenes can make a good story better, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they can fix one that's like missing its heart.
Yeah, I think what we have here, and it's something I've talked about on the show before, and listeners might even be tired of me saying it, but I find that many, I might even be able to say most, directors in our contemporary times, those that would consider themselves an auteur, and a great many of them are. Of course, newsflash, if everybody's an auteur, then nobody is. Kind of like that word luxury that gets thrown around everywhere. If every apartment, if every subdivision out there is a luxury apartment or subdivision, then none of them are. so,
Exactly.
so for those that that think that way, there's this idea that the director and writer, it's like they're compelled to be the same, and you're not truly an auteur unless you're the writer and the director. And in the case of many of those films, including this one, you're also the producer. I saw a film a few weeks ago, not nearly on this scale, not nearly this gorgeous, but the director, the writer, the editor, the producer, might have even been the composer, all the same person, and you could tell in watching in the whole movie. And I state all that to get at this point that Fennell, the director, and Fennell, the writer, feel like two different artists. Subtlety is sacrificed in favor of blunt force reinterpretation of the original source material. But when she does adhere closely to the plotting of the book, the film works very well. When she strays, and I mentioned at the onset of the outset of the show, she strays very often. This adaptation buckles under the weight of this unnecessary revisionism. And we get a lot of revisionist cinema, which is probably a topic that's going to come up a little bit throughout our conversation today. And in short, no amount of technical achievement is going to compensate for lackluster writing, for flat writing, and most definitely not going to compensate for revisionist cinema, for completely revising characters, thus removing anything that made them relatable or compelling. And we're going to talk about some of those characters a little bit later on, more specifically. And what I would have liked to have seen is a fresh approach to the source material, but a fresh approach needn't be complete revisionism. But again, listeners, it looks gorgeous. The colors pop. It's absolutely beautiful film, but a beautiful film does not compensate for poor storytelling. Uh, the this particular adaptation, and I know you looked them up, Melissa. There's been multiple adaptations of Wuthering Heights. This adaptation takes significant liberties with character construction, particularly with Catherine's father and Isabella. And you welcome to throw some other names in there yourself, but those are two that really jump out at me. Comparing this adaptation to the 1939 picture, how did those reinterpretations of those characters, those or others, strike you? And do they feel like feminist reframing or more of a structural miscalculation?
That is a very good question. So I think the new adaptation definitely takes risks with character changes, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of character changes, in fact, beyond the two examples that you mentioned. Compared to the original, this version completely, in my opinion, changes Catherine's father, and there's
Yeah.
definitely changes with Isabella as well, and
Mm-hmm.
they seem very intentional.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things that I noticed with this version, Catherine's brother Henley's completely removed from the story.
Oh, yes.
He's not even in this at all, and his character's clearly been merged with her father.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of took Henley, and you see that quite often in adaptations going
Yeah.
from books to on screen. I've seen it in
Mhm.
many different movies. In this case, I feel like it does have a lot of impact to the overall story, though.
Mhm.
It changes it a lot. Her
Yeah.
father in the original film and in the book was originally a very kind man. I thought
Mm-hmm.
he tried to teach his children compassion and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he also died when they were younger.
Yes.
In this new adaptation, I feel like her father's really cruel. He's selfish.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Yeah.
clearly an alcoholic gambler, which
Mm-hmm.
kind of is taken from Hindley. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this whole personality has been taken from Hindley's
Yeah.
character, and he only cares about himself. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't care about anyone else, and I feel like it really is truly a structural miscalculation
Mm-hmm.
to have done that. I think it changes the foundation of the story. It changes the way the relationship is. A daughter's relationship with her father is very different from that of like a sister and brother.
Mm.
So it changes a lot. It altered the family dynamic, and I feel like that dynamic is what shaped Catherine's. Or it's funny hearing Catherine because in the original film it was Kathy. It was always
Yeah.
Kathy, but
Mm-hmm.
Catherine's emotional development, her
Yeah.
personality, and even her behavior as an adult. So I think that did
Yeah.
have a lot of impact.
Yeah, there's kind of this whole Cinderella type thing in the original story,
Mm-hmm.
but the death of the father is what brings about Heathcliff going from adopted son to stable boy. And I
Exactly.
agree with you, Melissa. I'd say the most egregious character assassination is that of Catherine's father, even more than Isabella. And I don't like the treatment of Isabella either, but the most egregious one is with Catherine's father, because, as you mentioned, he's kindly. He's a stabilizing force. He's the glue that was holding the family together, the glue holding the estate itself. And by that, I mean the physical place, holding the estate together. And it's only upon his death that Hindley, the son from previous adaptations, descends into cruelty and degradation, transforming Heathcliff into a rather perverse Cinderella inversion.
Mm-hmm.
By eliminating Hindley's character altogether and distributing all of his vices, gambling, drunkenness, cruelty onto the father, it makes him a monster, a bigoted drunk from the outset. And I would argue that's not reinterpretation, it's structural sabotage, because we need to see that transformation. The transformation of the estate mirrors the transformation of a lot of the relationships in this movie. Wuthering Heights is decrepit from the very beginning, and so we don't. There's no arc. Many of these characters remain very flat, and so there's not a lot of room for growth. And by corrupting the father from the beginning, the narrative loses that axis of decay. Decay is a theme in the original story. And it's a central theme to Wuthering Heights. The estate should mirror the relationships within it. Fennell presents, by Fennell presenting the estate falling apart and in disrepair from the very beginning, it's like everything is already broken. There's nothing meaningful. There's no meaningful deterioration for us to witness, and the symbolism that is all throughout Wuthering Heights collapses even before it can resonate with us, and so it takes a lot of those the ability, the opportunities, I should say, for us to closely read themes that may be relevant to us. Maybe we're not caught up in a toxic relationship like Heathcliff and Catherine are. Maybe for us it's something else, but we're not able to read that into this movie because Fennell removes any of that subtext from the story. And I know both of us watched the 1939 film before we watched this one. So just a real quick, we have a couple of minutes before we head into our first break. Real quick, Melissa, what just kind of 20,000 foot level, looking at plotting and characters specifically, what was that like for you going from the Weiler picture to Fennell's picture?
Well, I was actually looking for the differences when just because
Ah.
that's what you do. I was looking for the
Mhm.
differences more than I was looking for the similarities,
Mhm.
and that's what I saw. It was you're looking at 1939, and you're seeing the overly dramatic, overly acted, film. So you have to kind of take that away, put that aside, and look
Mhm.
at the overall movie, the overall
Mhm.
story. And I definitely felt like the new one is more relatable.
Mhm.
This new one is easier to feel like you can relate to it in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the characters were changed so much, including the main characters, including Catherine and
Mm-hmm.
Heathcliff.
Yeah.
They weren't these deplorable characters like they seemed to be in the original, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
that was a huge part of what changed the entire feel of the new movie. I actually felt like more like any old movie to me, any old romance, versus again what you mentioned. You're watching this whole story arc in the original, this change, this gradual change over time,
Mm-hmm.
and this I didn't feel that at all.
Yeah, they were terrible people in the novel, terrible people in 39, which is, prior to this one, was considered the gold standard interpretation of the movie. So that's why we're talking about that one specifically, listeners. And it was this toxic relationship. Like, they were both terrible, terrible people. And you can still read that a little into our Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi characters. Not nearly as much, though.
No, not even close to me.
No.
I feel like you could actually root for them, and in the original, you're just like, oh, get it over with.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're listening to Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC. I'm your host, R.L. Terry, and today I am joined by Melissa Watts, regular listener, former graduate school colleague of mine, and longtime friend. Today we are reviewing Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights, now in cinemas nationwide. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC. I'm your host, R.L. Terry, and today I am joined by Melissa Watts, regular listener, former graduate school colleague, and longtime friend of mine. Today we are reviewing Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights, now in cinemas nationwide. So, Melissa, Fennell seems less interested in subtlety. We hinted at that in our first segment. She seems less interested in subtlety and more interested in bold strokes. Do you feel that approach enhances the emotional intensity, or does it flatten the complex characters? Does it flatten the complexity, particularly for the female characters in Wuthering Heights? What do you think?
I think Fennell's approach definitely ramps up the emotion in this version. Everything kind of feels bigger, it feels darker, even more intense than the, for example, the 1939 movie. And instead of more subtle inner struggles, this story leans more into like heightened drama. At least as far as Heathcliff and Catherine's love for each other.
Yeah.
I feel like it hits hard emotionally in that respect. It is far less subtle than the original. Again, like I had said earlier, in this version, Heathcliff and Catherine's love feels more real, more pure, and less dramatic, so to speak. And outside of Catherine and Heathcliff, some of the characters do end up feeling a little bit flat. This version of the film focuses more on big dramatic moments, other than over subtle character development like in the original film.
Yeah, I think in terms of flattening of characters, flattening of female characters specifically, I mentioned Isabella earlier, and I think this is a good moment to bring her into our conversation. Her character, very different in this film compared to the previous one, and I'm not talking about she is the ward versus being the sister. That part I could take or leave. Whether she's the sister to Linton, like in the in the book and in the first movie, or his ward, I think is immaterial. That part you could she works either way. That does not determine anything about her. So I'm not. So aside from acknowledging it, I don't really have much in the way of commenting on it in our discussion, because I think it works either way. Where I think the disservice is in the flattening of her character. I love how she's quirky. I think I like her quirkiness. I don't necessarily like all the quirks and how they're expressed, but I like her quirkiness because I think it does work for her character, maybe even a little better than it is in Wyler's film. So I like the quirkiness to her character. She added some entertainment value, some lighthearted entertainment value in this story. But in prior adaptations, she possesses a greater degree of dimension, agency and tragic complexity. When she goes to marry him in the novel and in the 1939 film, you really feel for her. Like, oh my gosh, girl, don't do it. This is terrible. Can't you see what he's doing? And so you're, but in this one, she's just, it's almost like Dracula. This is like, we got like little hues of Dracula in here. But in this movie, she's compared to her previous iterations, very inert, stripped of that inner life that once made her more than just a narrative device. And even though she's quirky, and I mentioned I like that, she is pretty much reduced to a narrative device in here. So again, when Fennell stays close to Brontë, the film steadies itself. And here we're talking about the character. When she does get those few character moments right, it works. But when she diverges from that, the narrative weakens. And I think Isabella's character is a great example of that, and how we almost have a completely different person. What did you think specifically of Isabella's representation in this version compared to the 1939 one?
I think that it was a little creepy, to be honest. So instead of just feeling like this a sheltered romantic like she did
Mm-hmm.
in the original film, she comes across as, and the quirkiness is fun, but overly eager, very
Mm-hmm.
Catherine, and then later Heathcliff obsessed, and it's almost
Yeah.
creepy. And she's restlessly desperate to escape
Mm.
her, where she's at in her own loneliness and her own boredom,
Mm-hmm.
and will do anything. The interesting difference is that Heathcliff really reveals himself to her before she makes that decision
Mm-hmm.
in the new adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
In the old one, she seems more sensible.
Yes. Oh, she's much more sensible
They
in the
make her,
original. Mm-hmm.
yeah, they take away any sense of any common sense from the
Yeah.
character,
Yeah.
make her over the top submissive to Heathcliff instead of just being like being in a sad, loveless relationship, as I feel like was more portrayed in the original film. She
Yeah.
almost feeds off the way Heathcliff mistreats her. It's very disturbing.
Yes, without getting into spoilers, listeners, there is towards the end of the movie a very disturbing moment that I was not expecting. I was expecting something different because of how everything was set up, but my goodness, what we get was incredibly disturbing. And so, if you've seen the movie, you know what we're talking about. But just beware if you're going out to watch it. And I'm not here to tell you not to go out and watch it. Just here to talk about the movie. There is a very disturbing moment, which seemed very incredibly uh, out of character from what was established in this movie, and certainly out of character from how she was expressed in the novel and in the 1939 film. And it's like a Heathcliff for everybody is this drug, is this kind of warped aphrodisiac, and even the sensible, or at least the what has been in the past in representation, the sensible Isabella isn't even immune to his wiles.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
so Fennell's work, and we can even because you mentioned you've seen Saltburn. Probably many listeners of the program have also seen Saltburn. Fennell's work is often marked by what I would call applied postmodernism. We could dedicate an entire show to that, so we're just going to kind of hint at it here. She doesn't just reinterpret existing material, doesn't just reinterpret legacy material, traditional material. She actively deconstructs the material and then redistributes meaning. Do you feel that Fennell, and this is just looking at her filmography in general, do you feel that Fennell undermines the emotional and structural integrity of the plotting and characters here in Wuthering Heights, more broadly her films? Uh, you know, do you think by that undermining the original, is she creating something new that will endure like the original? Where do you fall along that spectrum?
I think it depends on what your expectations are when you go to
Mm-hmm.
see the films. So if you're looking for true, some people go into it expecting it to be very true to the novel, true to the original.
Mm-hmm.
Then you could be really disappointed. I think her approach changes characters in big ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can make the story feel really fresh, make the characters and even their struggles more relatable to the audience, like a modern audience. So in that way, it depends on what your expectations are. And even though some parts of the plot in this particular film are very different, those changes can help the emotions and conflicts feel more real, again, to a modern audience. But it really does depend on your expectations of the film.
Yeah. Do you see any similarities between Fennell's work in Saltburn and her work in Wuthering Heights?
I think the portrayal of obsession, I
Ah.
see that, and maybe going beyond that what we discussed, disturbing, seeing disturbing actions come to life
Mm-hmm.
on the screen. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where you see the similarities is her portrayal of obsession, whether it be love obsession
Mm-hmm.
or just an obsession to be like someone, be with
Mm-hmm.
someone.
Mm-hmm.
She I feel that is very similar.
Perhaps we're getting a little window into our artist, as there as one's art often reflects something about him or herself. I want to say it is it Voltaire? No, it's not Voltaire. It was oh gosh, I'm forgetting. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting who stated it. Oscar, I think it was Oscar Wilde. I think it was Oscar Wilde said something to the effect of, "All art is self-portraiture," meaning all art is a reflection on some level, some angle of the individual creating it. I think in this movie that she absolutely redistributes meaning. We talked about how she just redistributes characterization earlier, and I think it's both the film's strength and its weakness. On one hand, deconstruction can expose power dynamics, emotional undercurrents that earlier adaptations might have softened. But when you start dismantling the structural pillars of a story, any story, not just Wuthering Heights, when you start dismantling the structural pillars of a story, especially a classic like this, I think you risk weakening the emotional payoff. We've talked about that a little bit today already, weakening that payoff, weakening those arcs. And the original novel, previous adaptations, they will continue to endure because the architecture is incredibly precise. This one, not so much. I feel, while I admire the film's boldness, admire the film's whole gothic milieu, the shot composition, technical achievement. I admire all of that, and I think she's a fantastic director. But and this is where her skills as a writer kind of pale in comparison. I'm not convinced that the emotional integrity of the story remains intact once she has finished doing this kind of revising and redistribution.
I was actually going
Yeah.
to use that term exactly. She kind of redistributes almost like the I hate to use the word blame. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's the right word, but redistributes the cause and effect maybe
Yeah.
of how this story kind of rolls along. That it really does. She with the characters of Catherine and Heathcliff, you love to hate them is what it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's called this great love story, but is it? And when she
Yeah.
retells the story and deconstructs and then rebuilds, she makes them more like a classic love story versus the
Mm-hmm.
true foundation of the story.
Exactly. I could not agree more. I mentioned Saltburn a moment ago. I'm going to mention it again here. One of the more surprising aspects of Wuthering Heights, of our film today, is its restraint. I don't know about you, Melissa, but after watching Saltburn a couple of years ago, and I think many people anticipated something far more explicit or even erotic in Wuthering Heights. Instead, though, I'd say the passion is often more implied than shown, relatively speaking. And as a woman watching this adaptation, do you find that Fennell's restraint, at least I feel it is restraint comparatively speaking, do you find her restraint is effective or more cautious?
Well, when you say relatively speaking, relative to Saltburn or relative to the original film?
Relative to Saltburn.
Exactly. So I did know that I was being facetious, but yeah, I didn't find it restrained at all. You're gonna
Oh,
laugh.
you didn't?
Maybe I'm a little
Okay.
being a little prudish just because of watching the I think because I was more comparing it to the original.
Okay.
When I was watching it, I certainly wasn't comparing it to Saltburn
Okay.
until Heathcliff licked the wall.
Okay.
But that was a little Saltburn there because that was representative of her skin.
Yeah.
But no, I think being set in the early 1800s, it does change your view compared to like Saltburn. But I feel like the like you said, the passion between the characters feels very strong and direct to me. Compared to Saltburn, yes, maybe it was a little tame, but compared to the original story, whether it be the novel or the original film, I thought it does come across as a little bold and intense because it's, you know, when you think of stories told in the 1800s, especially the early 1800s, you think of everything as being so simple and being so rated G.
Yeah.
And so in comparison to that, I felt like nothing was held back and it didn't feel implied. Now, compared to Saltburn, maybe everything feels a little held back or implied. But I felt for that story, I felt like it was much more intense than what you would expect from something in that time period, or representing, I should say, that time period.
Okay.
So again, maybe I sound like a prude, but I thought it was a fair amount, and I don't think it needed more, and I don't think it needed less for something that was you know, reimagined. I think it was kind of just right. Now, again, you mentioned, and I won't say what it is, but a more disturbing scene at the end, and although that was not necessarily sexual, it was definitely implied sexually.
Yeah. Yes.
So I feel like that alone, even though it didn't really show anything in that nature, I feel like that was more intense than anything else.
Yeah, I think it was really even more intense than anything from Saltburn. Saltburn certainly has its moments of eroticism, but I think the scene to which you're referring is more disturbing than anything we saw in Saltburn. Certainly more disturbing than anything that we saw in this film. But you know, I'll concede your point. You know, comparing it to the novel, comparing it to the 1939 film, certainly much more bold. And I guess I was, you know, comparing it to other of Fennell's work. Because I want to give her credit for, because I'm, you know, kind of very hard on her storytelling, but I want to give her credit for the restraint that I feel she showed, because I was anticipating it to be much more provocative, something along the lines of Saltburn. And certainly in what I saw on social media, there's a lot of speculation that it was going to be much more explicit. But I found that, you know, compared to what I anticipated it to be, that it was comparatively restrained. I'd say a lot of the passion is more, again, comparing it to Fennell's previous work, is more implied than shown. That the edginess exists, but comparatively, I'd say it's a bit more measured. Not except for that one scene. I wouldn't say it's terribly gratuitous, but and I think there's even some irony in that the restraint underscores her discipline as a director, because her writing still falters, but as a director she was showing more of that restraint in the picture. But yeah, compared to the 39 in the novel definitely different. But who knows? Maybe we're not giving 19th century folks enough credit. Maybe they were a bit more wild
Let
than
me imagine.
than we would imagine them to be. Well, you're listening to Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC. I'm your host, R.L. Terry, and today I am joined by Melissa Watts, regular listener and former graduate school colleague and longtime friend of mine. Today we are reviewing Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights, now in cinemas nationwide. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC. I'm your host, R.L. Terry, and today I am joined by Melissa Watts, regular listener and former graduate school colleague of mine, and longtime friend as well. Listeners to the show, when you've heard me talk about my friend in Savannah, that is Melissa. So now you can put a voice with a name. Today we are reviewing Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights, now in cinemas nationwide. So have a great cast here, regardless of how they were written. Undeniably, great performances here. So I want to talk about the performances specifically, and feel free to talk about some others, Melissa. But specifically, I want to talk about Robbie, Lordy, and Hong Chao, they who played Nellie. They bring considerable emotional gravitas to the screen. No surprises there. Anybody that knows these actors, that should not have been a surprise. Not knocking at listeners, not devaluing it. Command performances, but nothing surprising because you knew it would be high quality. So putting craft aside for a moment, Melissa, did the performances keep you engaged? So, regardless of the writing of the characters, the performances themselves, or maybe even in spite of the writing of the characters, did the performances keep you engaged even when the story wandered? Were you continually invested in the actors and their chemistry with one another?
Well, honestly, when I saw who was in this film, I honestly wasn't sure how I'd feel about them together.
Mm.
But Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi, I think they had great chemistry. And I know this is terrible to say, but there's a little bit of an age gap there, and I was
Yeah.
a little surprised. But
Mm-hmm.
you would never notice it in the
No.
film. They were great together. I wasn't expecting it, but I love Margot Robbie. I think that um, she has great acting chops. I think she can
Mm-hmm.
do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And Elordi, I've seen him in many different films, and
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I just didn't know what to expect together. I
Yeah.
really didn't know. But yes, they definitely kept me engaged. I was rooting for them all the way. I think the new adaptation of the film, we talked about, it makes the characters less flawed and more
Mm-hmm.
likable,
Mm-hmm.
much more likable. And so you're rooting for them. Totally changed how I experienced their story. It was completely different.
Yeah, their certainly performance is much better than in 39. So I may praise the 1939 for its writing, and even I love the kind of the noir, almost noir aesthetic, very gothic aesthetic to it, which this film has as well. But there nothing beats that gothic aesthetic on a grayscale movie. It's just much richer than anything you can do in color. However, I will say, even though the original has Sir Laurence Olivier, one of the greatest actors of all time, I must say the performances in Fennell's film much better than the performances. Not the writing of the characters, mind you, but the performances themselves much stronger, much greater chemistry. I believe these two, are destined to be together. I can't say that I felt that way in the 1939 picture. So it scores very highly for me in that performative dimension, much more grounded. You still get that operatic intensity, but it still feels more I just more organic than in the 39, which is highly theatrical to the point it almost feels a bit campy. And in this one, it never feels like that. It never kind of wanders in around the territory of parody. Just very strong performances. I agree with you there. I think the performance that captured me the most, and perhaps it's for the subtlety of the performance, is Hong Chow as Nellie. Much different Nellie than we get in the original. I may like this Nellie more. I don't necessarily like how her character was written, but I do like the tone of this Nellie a bit more than I did in the original. And you could let me know what you thought about her in just a moment. But her performance, like, I think the best performance in the film. Every moment she's on screen, there's this compelling presence. She's observant, she's restrained, and she is quietly anchoring the emotional chaos around her. And in every scene, her performance elevates what the script undermines. What did you think of Hong Chau's performance as Nellie, or even, by extension, the character of Nellie herself?
Well, the character of Nellie herself was a completely different character. She was someone new. And I don't know that we would have gotten any of that out of Hong Chow if she was playing that same character as she was written in the original film or even the novel. She was just a storyteller, more or less, I felt, in the original. And she was so nice.
Yeah.
So you just got nice. This Hong Chow has plans. She's smart.
Yes, she is
smart, and I don't want to use the word devious because that's not it.
No,
but she definitely has plans. She knows what she's doing. She follows through, and she knows how to manipulate things to the way she wants them to be. And as an actress, she pulls that off in a way that it's so believable.
Yeah.
She's understated yet very important character. And she pretty much facilitates everything that happens.
Yes, she does.
Everything.
The moment where and I would do my best to walk around any spoiler, because it is different than the 39 film and in the book. That there's this moment where Heathcliff reveals something, and then the light bulb goes off in Catherine's mind, and that turn was so incredibly engaging. I was all for that turn. I'm like, oh boy, the gloves are off now. And I did not know what to expect. And then we have like two more twists after that I also did not fully anticipate either. So her character is given much more agency. In the 39 film, she's storyteller at the beginning. She is a paid companion, not escort, listeners, paid companion. So she's a paid companion because she is in this movie, she is connected to a noble family, but she's a bastard. And so she's the illegitimate daughter. And so while her father is noble, she isn't. So this is kind of like the best thing for her, which isn't in the original. But I actually like that in here because it makes sense in that world. This is kind of like what would have happened to the illegitimate son or daughter of a noble family. So I believe her relationship with the family and with Catherine here. So I don't like how the character was written there at the end, but I do like how we took a character that didn't have much agency in the original text or in the 39 film and give them much more to do in this film.
I actually agree. I really loved her character.
Yeah, I really enjoyed her great performance there. The film runs, Melissa, as you know, 2 hours and 15 minutes, which exceeds much of the original interpretations. The Wyler film, hour and 45. Other films somewhere hovering around the neighborhood of between an hour and a half and 2 hours. So this one exceeds that. And if you can justify that time, great. There's a lot of films nowadays, and you've probably seen some of them, that are running 2+ hours, and it's just like, okay, A lot of that could have been cut out. You're just trying to augment your film, inflate your film to be more than 2 hours, so people think that it's weightier than it actually is. So with this film, in my opinion, feels incredibly padded structurally. Did you feel the pacing strain? And if so, where did you feel it in this film?
Well, I'm going to call myself out again and mention what you mentioned earlier is that I am a person who likes streaming, but not for the reason you might think.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes, especially when a film is long, I want
Mm-hmm.
to be able to pause, go use the restroom, go get a snack, like
Mm-hmm.
that. That's why.
Mm-hmm.
So I was worried that this film was going to feel really long when I saw the running time. I thought, oh my gosh. But let me just say that I was pleasantly surprised.
Okay, so you did not think? No,
I did not. I didn't notice any slow
Okay,
spots.
you didn't.
No,
Very interesting.
I was worried because as I nibbled on my popcorn and sipped on my soda, which I got small ones, I thought, are these going to last? But I put it down and I just started watching. And the movie, for me, the story moved faster than I expected.
Okay, so
I was
you
so
were completely
absorbed.
enraptured the whole time
I was the
from beginning
entire
to end.
time. And
Huh?
I can get bored sometimes. And I'm sure it depends on your expectations,
Yeah.
what entertains you as a person.
Mm.
I was totally absorbed the entire time. It went by fast for
Really?
me. Yes, and I wasn't
Okay.
expecting that because I was drawn in, and maybe part of that is because I liked the characters more.
Okay.
Instead of being irritated by them and thinking, "Oh, when is
Yeah.
this going to be over?" I was rooting for them. I was excited. I wanted to see more um, of Nellie's character. I wanted to see
Mm-hmm.
what she was up to because she was so different.
Yeah.
I was drawn into it and entertained the entire time.
Okay. I started checking out during the second act. I feel what could have more effectively be told in an hour and a half, or even right at 2 hours. It was augmented to be over 2 hours, and it's that protracted second act, or at least protracted in my opinion. And again, listeners, you just heard an opinion that didn't notice it at all. So take these opinions for what they're worth. I could be the one totally wrong. Melissa could be the one totally right. I found it to be lagging in the middle. And my little personal rule is if I look at my watch. Now, listeners, I'm not wearing a smartwatch. I'm wearing an old-fashioned self-winding watch with hands. So there's no notifications that are popping up on my watch. So if I look at my watch, that communicates to me that I'm not completely absorbed in the story. And it was there in the second act that I looked at my watch a couple of times. One time I looked at it and then I waited a while, looked back at it again, thinking, gosh, a half an hour must have gone by. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's only been 15 minutes. only 15 minutes has gone by. So I think there's another editing pass could have done the movie some good. However, that perhaps I'm in the minority on that, and you're more representative of the general opinion. So listeners, you'll just have to decide for yourself. Does it feel like 2 hours and 15 minutes, or does it move along at a steady clip as Melissa suggested? Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour here, but another thing I want to talk about before we wrap up our conversation, Melissa, I want to tackle, more broadly speaking, something we've danced around this whole hour. When adapting an existing story like Wuthering Heights, or fill in the blank, use another classic film or a classic work of literature. When adapting an existing story like Wuthering Heights, where is the line between reinterpretation and misrepresentation? And should we celebrate bold revisionist cinema or demand fidelity to narrative architecture? It's a spectrum there. So where do you fall along that?
I think when you're adapting a story like Wuthering Heights, it really does come down to whether the changes actually make it better
Mm-hmm.
or just mess with what made it great in the first place.
Mm.
I think that really does matter. So, like taking bold risks, like was done in this film, it can help it feel, like I said earlier, more modern and relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for someone who's seeing it for the first time and isn't comparing,
Mm-hmm.
that can be a good thing. But you don't want to tweak things so much that the characters stop feeling like themselves. In this case, they didn't quite feel like themselves anymore, but I actually liked it. But it did take away from the original feeling of they're really. I mean, everything I ever heard about Wuthering Heights before I watched the original film, before I started reading the book, was that nobody likes Kathy and Heathcliff. They're not likable. Nobody likes them. They're horrible people. And they still were not. They still were very much. They were very faulty characters.
Yeah.
However, I still like them and rooted for them in this version. In the original, I honestly didn't. I was indifferent to their outcomes. In the original, I really was. I didn't care one way or the other. So that can be a good thing, but does the plot fall apart when you make those changes? And that can be a problem. So it's really a balancing act. It can be creative and bring something new, or it can really tear it apart. It really just needs to keep the heart of the story intact. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I feel like the heart of the story was kept intact in this. However, if you're someone, again, who really wants to keep that true, true narrative architecture, as you said, then they may not be pleased with the outcome.
Yeah. So there you have it, listeners. We have some character redemption. Perhaps that could have been a whole topic in and of itself. We have some character redemption there compared to the original. And I will say, for all the issues that I have with the film, I do find them more likable in the book and in the 39 film. It's like these two people just deserve one another because they are so toxic, they are so terrible. I cannot, in good conscience, put them together with anybody else. They just deserve one another. And you even go further to praise Fennell's revisitation. Can I conjugate it that way? Reimagining of these characters. So perhaps the real question isn't whether Fennell's Wuthering Heights is good or bad, but whether it understands the difference between transformation and distortion. We've talked about examples of both, but I think this is a good place to leave it on a positive note with our two main characters, a bit of a redemption for them compared to how they've been represented in the past. So I think we will leave it there. And that is all the time we have for today. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us on ReelTalk today. And I hope to have you back on again in the future.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
And if you missed any of today's episode or to listen to past episodes of ReelTalk or other shows on WKGC, we are on a podcatcher near you. Just search for WKGC Public Media on your podcast service of choice. Stay tuned for Jazz in a Minor Key with Walter Hale coming up next. Thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you'll tune in again next week, same time, same place, for more ReelTalk on 90.7 WKGC.